So I'm watching a horror movie once again after many weeks. I think it's been weeks, at least. I decided to take a break. You see, I was going a bit overboard, I guess, with them, and uh, I intended to watch one now, but I couldn't decide on which, and then I ended up anyway. Um, I decided to watch a really title, generically titled one, right? Like, you couldn't get more generic than this. In fact, I probably have problems finding it online considering it's so generic. Simply called Ghost Stories. That's pretty much it. And I'm not entirely sure what year it's from, so it's a problem. It is those uh, film from the UK. So anyway, yeah, and it's about three different ones where Martin Freeman is one. That's the only one I mentioned because it's the only one I know really. It'd be a bit bizarre seeing him after Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, but there we go. Maybe he has had a ghost story after visiting that two-headed president, and the depressed robot. Yeah, anyone would get ghosts after a depressed robot visits you. Maybe it's the ghost of the depressed. What was he called again? Oh yeah, Marvin. Marvin. Yeah. Anyway, yeah. So, I watched the first story, and it's very typical, really, of any other. It practically has all the horror tropes possible. Um, you need mostly Western, but even Eastern. Well, to be honest, there isn't that much difference. I mean, sure, sometimes Eastern has subtle horror that sort of, doesn't have gore or, scare fights and such, but yeah, it does as well. So, you can't really differentiate them ultimately. It's many of this genre yeah. So it's a pity. This is kind of why, well, in a way, kind of why I paused for a bit as well because it's just so same. Everything's the same. The first story here had things moving about, poltergeists, etc. Things that appear out of nowhere. Of course, the torch is used because how else would you do that? It's very stereotypical. They just added the extra of some old guy just swearing constantly, like there's no tomorrow. Yeah, and then somehow he became religious, supposedly. Yeah, I doubt it, dude. Unless he just swears at God as well, that's the only thing he would do, surely. So anyway, then he goes to see the priest, and not the investigator that is, and the priest says something strange, um, with regards to the heartbeat that stops, that skips a beat, right? Now, I just thought of saying that, it's bizarre to think that it has anything, even not that bizarre, in a way it's sort of scientific, but it's not definitive, and obviously anyone who thinks that it is not really absolutely correct because it's, yeah, hearts skip beats all the time. So this is the problem. I mean, sure, we're talking about someone in a coma, so to be fair, I don't know whether the heart skips it differently. I'm assuming it does. I'm not sure. I mean, if it normally doesn't skip at all, and then I mean, sure enough, if it didn't skip for a whole year and then suddenly skips as soon as her father comes to see her, then sure enough, there's a correlation. But if it skips often, like I think normal life, like it does with the average normal. I don't think there's a correlation, if that's so. I mean, it could be for any other reason, it could be purely chemical, just coincidental, and just it's a very strange thing, so first of all, even if it did skip a beat because her father is around, what's it got to do with spirituality? That's the thing you should have asked him. Then he soon said that he left anyway. Um, it's a bit bizarre. Yeah, that's the one question actually I would have asked. Surely, what the hell has got to do with anything? Huh? And yeah, I'm assuming I'll be possibly comparing this, I guess, to that other movie from the UK as well, because it's sort of, I don't know if this will focus on religion more than this than it did already, which isn't that much really. They just went to a church just now. Before that, it wasn't really very religious, but I don't know. They've already so, but yeah, it might be slightly comparable, maybe to what was it called again? Um, the one where investigators went to investigate a priest, and then kind of forgot what it's called. But anyway, I also commented on it, so it's in the archive, and I actually like that. So so far I don't like this as much, but I might change my opinion. Anthologies don't tend to be thought the best usually, unless every single story is really good. They don't overall collectively they don't tend to be the best. Kind of like what was it called? Something Inferno, I think. I watched months ago. Also commented on. Yeah, I mean it wasn't too bad, but it wasn't good at all. Not as interesting as the one set in a church, I think, with a twist at the end. I like the twist. So a twist don't necessarily, I mean, make a movie, but they do add to it, they, to make it interesting. And this has a twist, but we'll see anyway. Yeah. So far though, not so this isn't uninteresting, let's say. So yeah, I finished it, and I kept being indecisive, I suppose. I kept thinking, yeah, but this is just very stereotypical sort of horror, very and in a way it was, but then at the end they tried to do something, I suppose. For all the stereotypes that certain movies do, it's let's just say it should be. I mean, if a genre is so stereotypical, then sure enough, it could be helped with twists, right? And so in the sense, I mean, I know I did say that twists do not necessarily, I mean, do not necessarily, right? Uh, aren't an automatic positive. But in some cases, I think it is. I mean, especially in cases where you just get stereotypical genre tropes. When you get tropes, I mean, there's so many horror movies that have all these tropes within them, but no twists at all. And so in this case, I mean, in comparison to this, this would be not inferior, shall we say. Uh, it's still, I mean, it's one of those things, where the components aren't really superior by themselves. I mean, the whole story leading up to the last 10 minutes isn't one of the most amazing I've ever seen. Then the last 10 minutes redeems it just a bit. Not as much as that other movie that I watched that I still cannot remember the name of. Sat in a church mainly. Yeah, no, that was that the mockumentary. That was throughout quite interesting. It was sort of food for thought and such throughout. Whereas this was mostly throughout stereotypical. Then at the very end, it turned course. So in the sense, it wasn't too bad. And somehow it reminded me of Brazil. I think Brazil took a similar. But see, with Brazil, for example, I haven't seen it in years, so I'm not sure if I can remember it clearly. But throughout Brazil, I mean, obviously it's sci-fi, so it's very different. It's still a dystopian fiction, so in a way, there's some sort of commonality. It's not horror, though, per se, but dystopia is, I suppose, sort of futuristic horror, I suppose. But it's more of a sociological horror, one might say, than a individual sort of, like in this case, there were demons, and then there were uh, uh, a zombie as well. It was a zombie, and there were poltergeists. That's pretty much it. Uh, but even there, it wasn't as like what we did in the shadows had also many different horror characters, but it was built up better. I mean, I'm sure that sure enough that was comedy. So I mean, it was a bit comedic. It was more comedy than horror at any rate. But it was built up better in my opinion. So everything that led up to the end wasn't necessarily so. The end then just melded. I mean, it didn't have a twist, so I guess it's not directly comparable, but it was still, in my opinion, a more cohesive whole as opposed to this one, which is more. Uh, it's not as broken, to be fair, as that Inferno movie was. I forgot the exact name now, but the anthology. It was still a sort of anthology, but at least they did try to collect them all at the end. And the twists so were definitely positive. And I did like Martin Freeman's character. Uh, Maybe not a comment at the very end, and not a few words, but this is the thing that there were a few words that seem to be unnecessary. I'm not sure why some movies have some words like completely unnecessary. Like, I mean, they're not even necessary. They're irrelevant. They just seem to be just random. Not even, I mean, relevant at all to the story at all. If they were relevant, then it'd be a different story. I just don't know why, and that is sort of a contributory factor to the just. I don't get what's the point of that. So but in addition to that and the tropes, it wasn't as cohesive in my opinion. It wasn't built up as well as some other horror movies as well. Actually, like for example, Ghostwife that has that has somewhat of a twist, I guess one might say, but it was still built up better in my opinion. So what essentially this movie tried to do is collate horror tropes, and and then try to do something new with them. But in my opinion, it shouldn't be just that. Like what we did in the shadows did something similar. At least with the comedy, at least it sort of renewed it. So it wasn't similar in the horror sense. I mean, it still had horror tropes. It also had comedy. So in a way, all of it was at least most of it was sort of new. It wasn't a collection of already used tropes and then you just add a twist at the end. The twist was positive. I'm not saying it wasn't, but you know, and the twist is also reminiscent of Inception, actually, isn't it? The different sort of thing. But yeah, but it's still not wholly novel, shall we say? The twist is novel. That I've seen so far, anyway. I haven't seen this exact twist. I've seen similar though, as I've said. Brazil had something similar, along with the addition of elements from Inception, but that's more about dreams. But the rest is still not novel. so you do not get like this really original tale. You know, not even what we did in our what we did in the shadows did. Uh, that was more novel in my opinion than many other horror movies I've watched. As I said, it's not horror, so it has comedy. Even then, you know, the only other horror comedy that surpasses it, I think, in my opinion, is Spellbound, but that has a romance added to it, so it's still not directly comparable. Uh, Still, in my opinion, different genres melded together are positive. This wasn't per se a different genre, this was more specifically horror. But they did try at least a bit of quirkiness, shall we say, and obviously the twist. I mean, yeah, yeah, horror, many horror movies, Easterns as well, would benefit with a twist. Not many do have it. Not many do have that. I'd rather a twist than just collection of tropes and just be done with it. Yeah, I never think of just tropes on their own as anything positive. I mean, sure, it has an element of bullying. There's a lot of horror movies along with other type of movies that have that as the topic. But you need to do something new with them, right? So with bullying, for example, you know, the movie I've watched recently, Better Days, was, you know, it was about how, despite bullying and violence, there was this romance that somehow tried to bloom and such. But you need to do something with it, anyway. In this case, all that this movie did is create a zombie out of that. Not exactly the most remarkable thing ever. And even then, at the very end, there wasn't any secondary explanation like there seemed to be with the other characters. But only the three primary characters, really, they seem to have that sort of secondary element. Um, Otherwise, though, but I did like it mostly. I mean, I liked it more than I thought I would. More, even up to the last 10 minutes. I mean, I thought much less of it. Not much less, but less of it than I did in the last 10 minutes. So the last 10 minutes redeemed it just a bit, but still not a lot. Uh, but it's wasn't too bad, but you know, wasn't as good as some of the other movies I've mentioned. You know, and you know, at one point, Norman was mentioned, right? As in, you know, a reference to Norman Bates. And actually, that sort of made me think that it was going to turn out to be somewhat similar in the second story of this, but it didn't. So that was a bit, yeah, misleading maybe, because even the house was sort of similar. You know, it had a downstairs and upstairs, and parents who seemed like puppets. But it didn't turn out to be like that. That was more of a demonic story than anything. That had more in common with Jacob's Ladder. Not really any of the greatness that Jacob's Ladder had. As I said, you know, many times in the past, Jacob's Ladder is an example, I think, of a really subtle horror made well. You know, it's a social horror in a sense, and it is made well. And even when you include, I mean, you know, many horrors have demons in them, but not many are as subtle as Jacob's Ladder, the original at least. I haven't seen the remake. Uh, it was done really well anyway. But not this was just there as a sort of uh, you know, lock into the end, you know. So but in terms of demons, it wasn't quite clear what the secondary meaning was to Goodman's life himself. It wasn't very clear, and but otherwise, I like the twist. So I got to emphasize. It's not like I'm saying, you know, the twist the demon a bit, but still not an incredible amount. Still, so it's just that. But otherwise, I mean, you know, if there was a sequel, I'd watch it. But it's still not the best kind of horror that I've ever watched. I've seen better, but still, it's not too bad. But I suppose in the end, I still preferred Martin Freeman as Arthur Dent than whoever he was here. I mean, he only had a big part. It was a sort of a crucial part, but well, I suppose it might be due to the fact that I prefer sci-fi, maybe, even though I don't watch it as much for some reason. But uh, his character though still reminded me of of Arthur Dent. I mean, in that series, of course, film really, the first film. I'm not even sure if there are sequels in terms of films. But yeah, it reminded me of it because something similar happens, but he doesn't do it himself, as opposed to in this movie. In Arthur C. Clarke. Douglas Adams' story. It's the rats, right, or is it mice who have the role he has here? Anyway, yeah. So it wasn't too bad, but yeah, I've seen that. It still wasn't too bad. Yeah, well. I liked also, by the way, the ending song. Yeah, almost a mesh. Uh, I've had it before, but somehow I never realized it was a sort of horror song, very much a horror. There's actually uh, mentioning of all of horror's characters. I'm not sure. I'm assuming I've never listened to the lyrics before, but it fit quite well in terms of the quirkiness as well. Yeah, and I also liked the posters of all the demons in that guy's room. It was quite odd, and how then he just said if he doesn't want to look at them, he'll look at some sort of puppets in a picture, except near the picture there were also some demons, so not quite a useful strategy that if you need to specifically look at demons, shall we say.